question is for Mr. Bodan. My name is Liveron Barrett. I'm representing the Gleaner. Mr. Bodan, it seems to me like the government is almost ready to reopen the scrap metal. You talk about all of the conditions that you're looking to implement. It seems as if you're almost ready to reopen the scrap metal industry. Is that the case? And one, and two, sorry, you spoke also about the conditions, but like Mr. King said, there were concerns about enforcement. You didn't touch on the enforcement in some of those regulations. Can you just speak to how you'll enforce some of the new conditions?
Right. Yes, we are looking at reopening the industry, but not under the existing conditions. We are going to change the regime so that we can enforce easier. When we spoke about a central site, it means now that we'll be able to have 100% inspection. Customs will be at the central site and will see the inspection from start to finish. I did not explain that clearly, but that's a difference in the regime compared to, say, we have now 50 sites scattered across the country. Customs might only be there for part of the time. And the current administration has given an undertaking to reopen the industry, but under new arrangements.
Regarding the new policies, how do you plan to enforce them? One, and what penalty will there be, if any?
Let me deal with the penalties. The penalties at the moment is $3 million if you are in breach. Copper, for example, is banned, and so you're not supposed to be found with copper in your possession. Or you're not supposed to be attempting to export copper. If you are found with stolen material that you cannot explain, that penalty is going to apply. So the penalty is quite onerous at the moment. The problem at the moment is that the inspection is inadequate. Materials are loaded into containers at various points. Some of these sites, for example, customs officers, some of whom are women, are intimidated and are not very comfortable to be at these sites from start to finish. And for that matter, customs normally screen the sites and say which ones they are more comfortable with. So we are going to have, the plan is to have proper inspection. And where there is questionable material, we will do traceability. One more thing I should tell you. The site will be a central public site, so the public will be allowed to come and view, inspect. If, for example, and the materials that are brought there will be allowed to, you may have to keep them for maybe about 5 days or what have you, to allow the public to come and look and see. So if you miss anything, you can come and see, and if you can identify your material, and there are different technologies which people can use to mark their material. If you can identify your materials positively, then the penalty will trip in. So it is going to be very much a different regime.
Scrap tends to lose its identity once you bundle that scrap. So how would you identify that? Because that's part of the challenge that we have as a company.
You are not supposed to. You're not supposed to change the form of the scrap too much. So, for example, let's say you have an I-beam, and that I-beam is 30 feet, but the truck body is 20 feet, and you can't have 10 feet projecting. You may cut it in two, but you cannot modify it so much that it cannot be recognized properly. The law now requires you not to do any modification of material nature. And it is really to address the problem that you have articulated.
Mr. Bodan promises to make it happen.
No, nothing is perfect. There will be difficulties. We are not saying it's going to be perfect, and you will have breaches from time to time. And when people breach, penalty trips in.
So you won't be able to compress your scrap?
What's the question?
You won't be able to compress it?
No, you have to compress it at the site.
And that site would be?
Yes, you have to bring it in its original form, and then you compress there.
And so the compressing is done before inspection?
No, they will inspect it before it is compressed.
Okay.
Is the ministry averse to giving consideration to the 10 recommendations made by the group?
Not at all, not at all. I find some of them quite interesting, and as I said, there are about 4 of them which we now do. But the conformity is not 100%, partly because of the challenge with the current regime. We believe by consolidating a central site, we will address some of those challenges. And there are some there which I did not mention, which we have on the drawing board. So, for example, the surveillance camera, that is definitely one. We see database. There are some interesting recommendations which we will certainly take into consideration. As I said, I'm here to listen.
Just one other question. Where it is identified that inadequacy of inspection contributes to the problem, and where Customs is unable to fulfill its obligation to inspect, is there any arrangement to ensure that the product is not exported without appropriate certification by Customs and the other teams, other agencies?
Could you repeat the question, please? I'm not
sure. The question
is,
the inadequacy of inspection by Customs and the police often allow for the products to be exported in ways that defeat the original purpose. I'm asking, is there any arrangement in place to ensure that where there is inadequacy, that the product is not exported?
Well, what we are saying is that you're going to have a 100% inspection now. That's not what has been the case, even though the law requires that, because it is not practical to do that kind of inspection because of the distribution of sites and the cost. If we were to do that, then we would have to impose such a very high cost on the exporters that they probably wouldn't make it wouldn't be profitable for them.
I have one question. Did the study that you did factor in the cost associated with implementing these conditions as in comparison to the potential earning power of reviving back the scrap metal industry?
Well, the last recommendation was that we get an estimate of what it is going to cost to put in a full inspection regime and use that as the basis to determine the licensing fee, and then use the licensing fee to fund the cost of inspections. So we haven't done the exercise of estimating the cost of inspection yet, but we propose that that be done as part of determining the licensing fee.
Mr. Bodan, this question is for you. One of the main reasons why the scrap metal trade was discontinued under the previous government, I believe, was, in a sense, the disparity between the benefits or the cost and the benefits of the trade. Now, one of the reasons that accounted for that was basically lack of oversight and, in a sense, what do we call it? The regulations, enforcement, so to speak, the lack of enforcement. So the regulations and the rule and the regulations and the laws were there governing the scrap metal. And if, in my opinion, they were in fact enforced, then we would have seen a more balanced and socially beneficial scrap metal trade. However, that was not the case, right? So the disparity between the cost and the benefit remained and continued, resulting in the halting of the scrap metal trade. Now, given the recommendations, right, and I see that you are basically resound and steadfast in your belief that the scrap metal trade should be renovated and reinstituted and continued. Have you, as a result of that, considered the possible disparity between the cost and the benefits of having the trade resumed, and in addition to that, the rules and further regulations that you believed can be implemented to make it better and to reduce the disparity? You believe that enforcement, as someone asked previously, the enforcement of those regulations, right, will be adhered to and will be stuck to, so that we can now, as a result, have a more favorable scrap metal trade. The laws and regulations that were there were not properly enforced, thus leaving that those loopholes and so on that persons basically took disadvantage of the system and did what they did and earned from it at the cost of law-abiding citizens. Have you now taken that into consideration with your new proposed additions to the rules and regulations and so on? Have you taken that into consideration and is now basically sure that the enforcement of those regulations will now change, making the scrap metal more effective and more productive?
We are going to put in place new regulations because we believe that this is an industry that we can have. I can't say to you that if we put in these new regulations, this new regime, if it will work 100%. Maybe it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, then government will have to take a decision. But we know that we have not exhausted the options as yet. That we are sure about.